Right, Jamie, thank you very much for having a chat with me and with 101st. So we'll get straight into it. So as everyone knows, with 101st, what we're looking to do is use the power of incredible real-life experiences to drive change. And part of that in this interview series is getting people to come chat to us that have some pretty incredible experiences, of which obviously you're one. So with that in mind and getting straight into it, very high level, can you kind of talk us through your story kind of so far? So your journey to becoming a professional rugby player and international, all the rest of it.
Yeah, so I come from a pretty big rugby family. So rugby was always something that was very much on the cards, a bit like yourself, I think.
I didn't have a dad that played professionally though, so.
Yeah, but they're both massive rugby noses, so it doesn't matter. So basically, I've got two older brothers who used to beat me up when I was younger, so try and toughen me up a little bit. And rugby was always sort of on the cards. So I got picked up by Saracens from school at about 14. Went down there just pretty low key Tuesday and Thursday nights in the academy. Started doing some sort of more senior academy stuff in the summers with yourself. And then, I guess it sort of started getting a little bit more serious for me towards around, the end of my school career, really, where I started playing sort of representative rugby, England under 18s and stuff like that. And I got offered my first professional contract out of school. So didn't go to university and decided to put that on hold and go and chase the rugby dream, I guess. And I was really lucky that I managed to break into the first team relatively quickly, probably within a year of leaving school, which was great. And then, I was probably playing so that would have been 2009, 2010. I was part of the first Premiership win in 2011, although I didn't get off the bench, but, we won't talk about that. Still got the medal. So I was part of that squad that won it for the first time, which was absolutely incredible, and the huge change that happened at Saracens at the time. And then sort of been a part of the club since, really. I think I've played sort of nearly 250 games now. And I managed to break into the England team just before the 2015 World Cup, quite luckily, but managed to sneak my way in there, and been involved there now for 6 years or so, which has been incredible, and was lucky enough to go on the British and Irish Lions tour in 2017, which was, again, probably one of the best moments of my life.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite already, and there's still, touch wood, many more years to come. But I mean, already that's a hell of a career. But if we just kind of work our way through it, then, so if you go back to the early days, so I remember, when we were playing in the academy together, pre 18 years old, before our contracts, you were playing every England age group there was. You've been playing up. I think you played up 2 years, the under 20s.
Yeah.
So, you were kind of involved in that really elite level for a long time. You get your first contract, and then you were, correct me if I'm wrong, were you the first, or was George the first? Who was the first out of our group that actually played first in the club?
Yeah, it was me, yeah.
You. So that, yeah. That jump then, so you were at that level even before the professional contract. You were essentially at that kind of professional level. Was there much of a jump for you when you broke into the first team, or because you've been on that trajectory, was it quite a smooth kind of?
Yeah, I was in a bit of a a bit of a naive headspace, I think, as a youngster, really. Like I mean, we'll probably go through it, but everything came relatively easy for me back then. It was like there wasn't too many people who played my position in the age group, of any quality, really, in the age group system. So, like you said, I managed to play up England under 20s, having, don't get me wrong, like I worked hard, and the philosophy that we had around Saracens really helped mold me as a person and as a player. But, I basically got there off the back of being relatively talented and not having to work too hard for it. And I felt like it was just another step in the sort of my progression of my career. And again, like I managed to break into the Saracens team, having, there was a superstar in Scott Brits, who was the starting hooker, who's probably one of the best. He won the World Cup with South Africa last year. Probably one of the best signings that Saracens have ever made, and I sort of fitted in quite nicely underneath. And yeah, I guess in terms of the jump, I felt like I was I was sort of ready, like I was like, oh, I've done, I played up 2 years under 20s. I feel like, there's not too much of a jump, but actually when I ended up playing, I realized that I had a long way to go. But there was part of me that was almost kidding myself that I'd be all right. And rather than sort of going, right, I need to really get my head down here and make big changes to my game to progress to where I want to be, it felt like it was like, right, there's going to be a progression here where I've gone from England age groups to playing for Saracens second team, to playing for Saracens first team. Next thing, the English press are the worst people ever, because as soon as there's a young player who plays in a Premiership team, it's like, well, the next step is for them to play for England regardless of their performance. And I was certainly reading those headlines, so I was thinking to myself, well, I don't, everything's going to come pretty easily. Next step's going to be playing for England, and that certainly wasn't what happened.
Because after that, because it did go then, because you say you broke in early, and even from as close mates as we are, but even from my point of view, and George, Owen, and Jacko, us together, the assumption from me anyway was that it was just gonna carry on that kind of steady trajectory, and then the club made a couple signings, and then you had like a year or two where you played 18. You actually played at 7 because you covered me for at least half a season, if not more.
Yeah, you shafted me, mate. Yeah.
But that's it. Like, that was quite a quick kind of there, and then all of a sudden,
yeah. So that was the thing. Like, I was really lucky. Everything was going really well for me. I broke into the Saracens first team really quickly. And like I said, I was sat behind Schalk Brits, who was the best player at the club at the time. And don't get me wrong, like I worked really hard to get to where I needed to be. But at the same time, when I got there, I almost just thought like I could take a breath and be like, oh, I'm here. Everything's just going to happen. Everything's going to keep progressing nicely. And I probably lost sight of the fact of how hard I needed to work to get to where I needed to be. And it wasn't until so I played probably a year and a half in the first team. And when I say play, I think that I could say that pretty lightly, because I was sat behind Schalk Brits. I was getting about 10 minutes off the bench maximum every week. Every other weekend I wouldn't get on. But there I was in my head playing for my local club professionally. The first, I was still under the age of 21, thinking this is absolutely incredible. And I probably was plateauing in terms of my progression. It wasn't. But at the same time, I didn't really have any sight of that happening. So it wasn't until Saracens signed John Smith, again, another South African World Cup winning captain, one of the greatest players of all time, in my position, where I went, it took basically them making that signing and me then dropping out of the first team every week to going, oh, actually, hang on, like, I need to reflect on where I'm at, what I've done over the last few years, and have I kept progressing in that sort of direction? Absolutely not. Where am I in terms of, physically, am I where I needed to be? Mentally, am I where I needed to be? Absolutely not. Have my skills progressed to a point where I need it to be? And I quickly realized that I was probably just scraping by, really. Like, in 10 minutes, you can't make that many mistakes. I was just sort of not going on to make that much of a difference. And fundamentally, my career was probably just starting to sort of dip off a little bit. And like I said, I then basically didn't play for a season. And as every rugby player does, I kicked up a massive fuss and thought to myself, why is this happening to me? Because it was the first time really that I saw I had to really dig in and work hard for something. Selection was something that always pretty much went my way. So I had a lot of conversations, to people like yourself and my old man. And, ultimately I looked at it and thought, well, I can't affect what selection happens, if whether I'm picked or whether I'm not picked. What I can affect is, the things that I can change. So there were 2 things that I specifically went after in that period, that I could work on regardless of whether I was playing or not. So I wanted to become the fittest front rower in the world, and I wanted to become the best line-out thrower to ever play the game. Those were like 2 things that I went to said to myself, and I was like, I can work on this. I can do this. These are 2 things that I can work on my line-out throwing in my house. I can do it every day at training, and fitness is something that you ultimately just need to get the work done for.
Yeah.
So in that year, I sort of turned myself around. Obviously, there were other things that I was working on in terms of my skill set and all the rest of it, but it almost gave me the kick that I needed to give myself a drive to go, right, let's get myself into the best possible position so that as and when the time comes that I do get my opportunity, I need to make the most of it. And there were times where I would get, selected on the bench, or I'd play second team games or whatever. And I'd be like, right, whatever time I get, I need to make the most of this opportunity. I want to make the biggest impact that I possibly can make. And I had a huge amount of confidence from the amount of preparation that I was putting in. And, I was feeling good about my fitness levels and my line out throwing. My skills were getting better. And ultimately, having gone through that experience, that put me in the best possible position the year after John Smith left. And Skolbrits actually then had a season-long injury, which left me being the first choice hooker. And I was able to then take that opportunity and kick on. And that was when I got selected for England and stuff. But I don't think that I would have been in that position having not had the year of not playing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite, you think the way you talk about it is almost as if this happened towards the end of your career.
Yeah.
With the, I suppose the level of the level-headedness and the way that you're talking about it. And it's quite a stoic way of thinking, in the sense that essentially what you're saying is, it's about controlling what you can control, which is something that so many people talk about, but not a huge amount of people actually do. And at such a young age, to kind of have your first setback and to approach it in that way, because, you look in business and in life, when you get dealt a raw deal or something happens, there essentially are two options. You either react how you reacted and make the best of the situation, or you kind of go the other way, and that leads down that particular path. So was there anything in that triggered you to go, this is how I'm going to do it? Or was it just a natural way of thinking?
Well, I just felt like so when the setback became clear that I wasn't going to be playing every week, I felt myself, certainly for a few weeks, I was going through this sort of negative cycle of going, I need to leave, why is this happening to me? And like I said, I had conversations. I think that was the most important thing. I was getting, opinions from other people that I cared about, people who were going to be honest with me. And it probably was my old man that said it to me the most bluntly. He was like, fundamentally, you've got an opportunity here to get loads better in a period where, trust me, in 5 years' time, you're going to be thankful for this. And, I'm really lucky that that's all happened. But, I had to just make the most of the situation that I was in. And, there's always going to be times, and it linked in later on in my career when I started playing for England and I was on the bench again. It was like, right, what do I need to do to make the most of the opportunities that are eventually going to happen as and when they come about? And I need to be as prepared as I possibly can be for when those times happen. And it's always dealt me in good stead. And I think, don't get me wrong, it wasn't always very much like, I need to do this, this is certainly the way. There were always ebbs and flows. And I was, there were times where there were big games and I was sat in the stands watching and I was gutted. But that would almost drive me on more to work even harder at my game, the next week. And I also think, given the goals that I set myself in terms of being the best line-out thrower that's ever won the game, you can't actually really ever have any sort of facts around that. And being the fittest front row, again, it's all relative. It's not, there's no evidence to show it. But they were two things that I wanted to go after, and they were huge. They weren't little things around, I want to be the, fittest in the Saracens squad. I was like, no, I want to be the fittest front rower in the world, and I want to be the best line-up thrower that's ever played the game. And those two things were like, it wasn't me being arrogant and thinking that. I needed those two goals to be above and beyond anything that I think that I actually possibly could really do. But I needed them to be that big for me to be able to go, that's how hard I need to work. And then I could judge myself on that every day in terms of going, right, was what I have done today, has that helped me get towards where I needed to be, or has it taken away? And, I've reflected on it since, and potentially having such big goals has sometimes allowed me to think nothing's ever good enough. So there are certain sort of flaws with the system, but at the same time, it was exactly what I needed as a young player to get my mindset right towards that.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point, because again, goal setting something, particularly in kind of the corporate world, and it's, you need to set goals. We need to have, and actually, what those goals are and it sounds quite an obvious point to make, but it's so important because, as you say, they're massive goals. You said to be the fittest in the world and the best thrower that's ever played the game. They're huge, but as you say, they're actually, when you look at it, they're impossible because, hopefully the game will never go away. So you can never be the fittest, but that's what gives you the drive to then go after it.
Exactly, yeah.
Because you're always going, well, am I? So with all that in mind then, so you obviously dealt with that situation, then went on to, since then really first choice obviously at the club. The noise increases around international selection and then you play international level rugby, similarly to Sarries, benched at the start of it for quite a bit, and then there was this whole kind of furore between whether you should start or didn't, and that whole back and forth. But in that bit of the journey, so take it you're fully first choice of the club, you then start playing for England. The stuff you spoke about just now, did you find that massively helped that element, that part of the career? And was there anything within that part that was kind of new that you go, actually, I need to change this, or I need to think about that?
No, massively. I basically found myself in exactly the same situation, just for a different team. 4 years later, one level up, yeah. But it prepared me so well for that situation. And people always talk to me about it, like, how can you deal with that situation? First of all, I certainly learned not to read the press. That was something that I definitely didn't. And I probably learned the hard way. You always believe the press when it's good, and it's always great when it's going well, but it's not so good when it goes badly. But yeah, I think that the mindset of making the most of any opportunity that I'm given. So, at the start of my career, my England career, off the bench, I was getting, again, 10, 15 minutes. And my mindset was, how can I impact this game in 10 or 15 minutes? And then suddenly I was, putting myself in good positions where those 10 minutes were turning into 20, were turning into 30, were turning into 35, which is pretty significant. Given a front rower coming off the bench, you don't really see them getting that amount of time. So, it allowed me to deal with my frustrations, but the frustrations never go away. That's the thing that's probably most important, because I think, when selection happens, if you're not bothered about whether you're starting or whether you're on the bench, then, it's showing that you don't really care that much. Like, I was incredibly driven to be the starting hooker for England, but at the time it probably wasn't the right thing that was needed. But what was needed was for me to be the best possible hooker that could then come off the bench and make an impact for the team. So that was my driving force. And then my goals changed. I was like, this is amazing, because I can now challenge myself on the 2 goals that I've set on an international stage. And I was thinking, well, this is perfect. So my line-out throwing statistics, I can now judge on an international level against the best hookers in each country. And that was great for me. And then again, the fitness thing, obviously it was off the bench and I wasn't getting as much time, but this is an amazing forum for me to be able to compare myself to, because ultimately what I wanted to do is be the best hooker in the world and the best hooker that I possibly can be. So that was my opportunity to do that. And I loved every second of it. And I am loving every second of that opportunity.
And then, so within that then, you say the frustration never goes away, and even if it happened again now after your experience, I imagine it would still be a very frustrating thing. So within that, when does the acceptance kind of come into it? So when do you get to a point where you're told you're going to be on the bench, and then you've got to go out half an hour later to train to help the lads that are starting prepare as well as they can? When do you take a step back and go, okay, the situation is a situation, I've got to now put best foot forward?
Yeah.
Or you just kind of swallow that and go?
Yeah, I think, listen, the frustration can linger for as long as you want it to linger, but ultimately you can't allow it to affect the job at hand. And I had a role within that team to prepare the team as well as I possibly could. But again, each training session was an opportunity for me to get better. So that was the way that I was sort of trying to look at it. But also in team sport, I think it's an interesting one. Like, you always have such an impact on the people around you on and off the field. And in an international environment, you're living with those people 24/7. You're in hotels and, you're constantly socializing with the people, which you probably wouldn't do, at club level. Those disappointments, I could just go home and I could complain to my fiance, and that's great. But, at international level, you're there and you're going, you go back to your hotel room and everyone's constantly around. So I felt like I had a responsibility to make sure that to show other people that I was still going to be as positive as I possibly could be. And I wanted to put the team first ultimately, and my own personal sort of frustrations behind me. And don't get me wrong, when I was on my own and sat there thinking I was frustrated, of course I was. But anytime there was an opportunity where I was in with other people, or every training session, I wanted to make sure that I was showing everyone else around me that I was, as positive as I possibly could be, and trying to drive the team forward, because like I said, you've got to have positive impacts on the people around you.
And that last comment, again, is so apt for any team in any environment. People underestimate the impact they can have on the influence they can have on the people around them through their actions and their moods and that kind of stuff. So I think for teams, it's a massive point. So if we take then, so we've gone through that, you now become first choice for England, and then you along with George, and so to George, you get the opportunity to essentially play the highest level of rugby that any Northern Hemisphere player can ever play, and go on the Lions tour to New Zealand. I mean, and you know me very well, I got emotional just watching you all get picked. So, for you guys, I mean, that must have been just, an incredible, because was it like Australia? Was it on TV? You watched it on TV, was it? And when it all got...
Yeah, so it was always weird on the Lions, because like Lions it's happening now. So Lions is always a difficult one, because you're being judged, and obviously there's that end goal. But for me, I hadn't started an international game, so I was going through Six Nations and I was playing well off the bench, but I hadn't started. So I thought that my chances were relatively slim. But there was a lot of talk around it, and the boys were saying to me, "Oh, you must be close," and all the rest of it. Anyway, I knew that I was playing good rugby and playing well for Saracens, and we did the double that year, or we won the Europe that year, and won the double the year before. So I knew my name was going to be roughly in the hat. So it is the most nerve-wracking time, because, like you said, it's the ultimate goal for any rugby player growing up in the Northern Hemisphere. And I'm like you, I'm a massive rugby nose. So I was like, I grew up watching the Lions, and I never thought in a million years I'd be playing for England. The Lions seemed above and beyond anything of my wildest dreams. But there I was with my name in the hat. And the night before, didn't sleep a wink. And we were training that day. And everyone always thinks that with Lions tours that you get told whether you're in or not, that you used to get a letter, whatever. You don't hear a thing. And you just find out at the same time as everyone else on Sky Sports News. So I was at the training ground, and obviously there were a lot of people there who were almost dead on to go. Owen, Maro, Mako, Billy, myself and George were probably two of the guys who were touch and go, but I'd be pretty confident for George also. Mm-hmm. But my name was very much like touch and go. So I was like, I'm not watching this in a room full of other people, celebrating other people go. So yeah. I was trying on my phone to get Sky Sports News on my phone, but I couldn't get it up in time. So I was like trying to load it, and it kept buffering, and I was like panicking. So you can imagine, like, I'm like, right, okay, I'm going to have to go upstairs and watch this with everyone else. So I like crept in this massive team room. There's 80 people in the team room watching the Sky Sports News. As it happened, they delayed the meeting. I'm just like stood in the background in this corner, just in like a mess. And yeah, like, I was lucky enough that my name got called, and it was probably one of the best moments of my life, really. It's, to date, it's that feeling. I can't tell you how good it was. And a huge relief, joy. I don't really know any other words to elation. I don't know. It's just, it was very surreal, the whole thing, I have to say.
But I mean, it's, well, obviously it's massive. He said it's the biggest thing a non-Hemisphere player can do. But then, so you go through that whole thing of, you're not even sure whether or not you're going to go. There's then the warm-up game schedule was pretty full on. Was it 10 games or something before the first test? So you're doing that. So not only were you not sure whether you were going to go, you then got picked. Then you kind of got these warm-up games as, trials. You then get picked to start the first test. So you didn't even know if you're going to go on the tour. And then you start the first test. I mean, that's quite by that time, and because you've done those games beforehand, was there more confidence in yourself to go, actually, I'm in with a good shout at being involved, or were you still very much like, I don't think I'm going to be in the 23? Well,
yeah, I mean, sort of reading between the lines, having played in that, you have all these games, and first of all, when I first went, even like on the tour, I realised that I was in with a chance because I had a good relationship with Steve Borthwick. Obviously, we played with him, and he was the England coach. And he told me, he was like, "Look, if you get your head down here, you're gonna be with every chance of being involved in the test squad." And so I just thought to myself, right, well, again, make the most of the opportunity. And I was starting games, and I was sort of reading between the lines that there was sort of a starting team, and there was all the talk around like the team that played the Maori were going to be the team that started the first test, and I was starting that. But it wasn't until my name was read out, that it actually became real for me that I was starting. And that was my first start in international rugby. Like, it doesn't get much better than that, really.
Well, it was big for me because I was on Jackson Stag in a nightclub in Las Vegas trying to get it on my phone at 2 a.m, trying to hear it like this. But it was huge, man. I mean, it's massive. And then obviously the tour itself culminates in, one of the most historical tours ever because it ended in a draw. But in terms of the Lions, that's 2 tours in a row that we didn't lose. So if you look at that whole experience as a Lion, was there anything within that experience that you learned that's different to your time with England and with Saracens that you've now taken back, or was it just simply another step up in terms of intensity, detail, and prep, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that was a big thing for me. It's always different with Lions tours in terms of the preparation and the training, because it's very much about gelling. So it certainly reaffirmed for me, the closer that you are off the field, the better that you're going to be on it. The relationships that you build make it much easier when the tough times happen on the field, off the cuff. It makes it a lot easier to have the difficult conversations, to say it how it is. And that needed to happen very quickly by nature of, playing 4 different countries, not knowing each other. We had to gel very quickly. So it certainly reaffirmed it for me. But I think it was just working with, the best of the best in the Northern Hemisphere, being able to work with those guys. I hadn't been at the top of the game for that long, and being able to work with people like Alan Wynne-Jones and Rory Best in particular, seeing how those guys prepared and how thorough they were and how strict they were the entire time. I think that was an eye-opener for me, and seeing the intensity that those guys trained and played at was different for what I was used to. And that's certainly something that I've taken back, in that I need to hold myself to a higher level than what I was. I need to judge myself to a different standard, and what I could probably get away with at Saracens wasn't good enough to be a British Lion. And that's something that I'm sort of always now reflecting on, is what I'm doing right now, is that training session that I've just had, is that of that standard, or that's basically where I'm trying to judge myself on now. And that's basically something that I picked up from the legends that were on that tour.
And assuming you were at that level, those 2 goals still remain.
Exactly. So, they will always be there. They're still here now. And
70 in your rocking chair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll still be practicing. Yeah, and I sort of, I judge myself on that all the time.
Amazing. So obviously we've spoken entirely about the rugby. So you've got all that experience in the bank, all those learnings and the principles and the goal setting and that stoic kind of way of thinking. You then, and remind me the year you started Carlton George?
So it was 2018.
So the year after the Lions tour?
Yeah.
So you take all that and then you start Carlton George, and I'm sure everyone watching this would have seen or heard or know what Carlton George is. So firstly, what was kind of the main reason for actually looking to not the business that Carlton George is, but actually wanting to start your own business while playing professional rugby? And then what are the key, if you had to pick 2 things that you've learned as a rugby player that have helped Carlton George not only get off the ground, but actually become a pretty fast growing business, what would they be?
So I guess, the reason for wanting to start up a business was, I think, we were lucky that, first of all, Saracens are a club that very much believed in the development of you as a person, and gave us great tools to enable us to, whether it would be study or starting up your own business, They massively encouraged us to do that. So it was always something that was on my mind. I wasn't studying at the time, so I thought to myself, well, is there another opportunity for me here to do something outside of the game? And basically, I looked at the two guys who set up Wolfpack Lager, Chris Wiles and Al Hargreaves, who obviously two guys who played at Saracens, who set up a very successful craft lager company. And I saw the enjoyment that they had in setting up their own business, but I also had a lot of conversations with them, mostly over their own beer, drinking their own beer, but chatting to them. And basically they sort of went with the mantra that, being able to switch off from rugby and having a side product, a sort of side project to go to think about when they got home, or, it was enabling them to sort of switch off from rugby and have to think about something else. And I think a lot of people get that when they have families and all the rest of it. But, I was at a stage of my career where, I needed that. I think a lot of the time I was, stuff would happen at training or stuff would happen in a game, and I would be sat at home thinking about it 24/7, and that's just not healthy. And, so that was basically the driving force towards wanting to do something. And then I was lucky that I grew up with Reece, and he was a physio, and we sort of molded ideas towards what we have now at Carter and George, which is trying to basically replicate the elite level of care that we get as professional sportsmen to the general public.
And it's really interesting because a lot of players that start a business whilst playing, more often than not, go for something that's almost a million miles away from the sport, other than obviously Chris and Jaeger chose beer, which is very intrinsically linked with the sport. But
most people go for coffee. That's basically it. Coffee and beer.
Coffee and beer.
Any beverage rugby players will go for.
Yeah, but yours is a really interesting one, because actually it's taking, I mean, we talk about experience, it's literally taking your experience as a professional rugby player from a care and medical point of view, and essentially trying to give that to Joe Public.
Yeah. That's the model that we wanted to run. I basically, I had some good ideas around. I had some ideas around rehab and all the rest of it. And Reece was working out in Dubai at the time, and they run like a relatively similar model as a physio. And they run a relatively similar model to what we run. And we just saw a gap in the market that was, you look at most high street clinics that you go to in England, generally it's just one physio, one treatment room, latched onto the side of a gym or whatever. And there's never really, the connection between strength and conditioning and physiotherapy and all the other different treatment opportunities that we get as professional sportsmen weren't ever available for these guys. And often, ultimately, when you try and treat someone, hands-on obviously is amazing, but 80% of it is rehabilitation, getting in the gym and being able to rehab something, as you well know, having had a million injuries. And, most high street clinics were going, right, well, here's a program that you need to go and do. Go and pay, £60 a month to go to your local gym and, go and do it on your own. Whereas what we wanted to do was say, right, well, this is the treatment that we're going to give you. We're then going to pass you on to our rehab specialist who has an S&C background, and the gym was on site. So it's all within walking distance. And then after that, go in and get some cryotherapy, acupuncture, all the rest of it. Everything. We wanted to just be a multifunctional clinic all under one roof, and sort of try and save people time and effort and money, actually, to sort of give them the sort of level of care that we get as professional sportsmen.
And within that then, so you're about to open next month, you're opening your third clinic?
Clinic. It's the sort of official number 2, yeah.
Okay.
There's three on the go, yeah.
So you're opening that. So obviously it's growing, and doing that off the back of, COVID and the pandemic clearly shows that it's a very strong, sustainable business. So in order to get it this far, what would you say is the key thing you've taken from your experience as an international level rugby player and that you brought across into your business?
I think relationships is something that I've always said that the link between sport and business in terms of the team that we have at Carter and George is very much a team, and we want to work together as best as we possibly can and be cohesive. And that idea of, you know, the Saracens model, where the closer you are off the field, the better that you're going to be on it, is very much that theory also. You know, we want to, you know, you walk into Carter and George and everyone, all the staff are very friendly. We're all friends. We have, you know, great opportunities to spend time with each other socially, but then also then, you know, that transfers across to day in, day out, because we need everything to run very smoothly. We need the physios to have a good relationship with the S&C staff. We need the receptionist to be able to talk to the, you know, and whoever, the physiotherapist or the osteopath or whatever, you know, that these are all things that we, you know, I think it's invaluable, because it just makes the whole operation run much more smoothly. And like I said, with the rugby, when things are going badly, or when difficult conversations need to be had, or something needs to change, knowing that person and knowing what makes them tick and knowing how to approach the conversation just makes the whole thing a lot more, have a much more positive outcome. And so that's something that I basically pushed from, you know, with Reece. I said, this is the model that I think works the best, and he couldn't agree more. And it's great to be able to work with someone who's very much in the same mindset. You know, he's obviously from a very different background, but played pretty high level of cricket and understands how sort of the team dynamic works. And you know, also, you know, has been a Saracens fan for a long time, and I've sort of chewed his ear off for a long time about why our culture is so great and why it works. And, you know, that's sort of the model that we're trying to run at the clinic.
And then to offer the reverse question. So obviously, you know, when I finished and got into business, you know, my learning curve was very steep, so I didn't have a clue about what I was doing. Is there anything you've learned from your time running the business that you now take back to rugby?
Good question. I mean, there's lots, like day in, day out. I think the interesting thing for me was around, again, it's sort of like the same answer, but conversations and knowing people and the way that people tick. Because obviously in a rugby environment, in a heated sporting environment, the message needs to be delivered very clear, concise, and often can be, you know, you're in the heat of the battle and it can be one word answer, do this. And actually, you know, that's just because that's the environment that it's in. But that's all we've ever known. That's all that I've ever known, is that's how you get the message across, you know, X, Y, and Z. But having worked in a different environment and been in a different environment, knowing that there are other ways of getting the point across has been invaluable. I also, you know, the amount of preparation that goes into, you know, the meetings that we run, I always think about that. And then there's certainly been transfers across towards my preparation for games, in terms of, you know, writing down a list of outcomes. What do I want to be today? What do I want to get out of the game? Is very much the same thing as what we write down before a meeting, before whether we meet, you know, we're interviewing someone or we've just got a general team meeting. What do we want the outcome to be, and how do we get there? And that's certainly then transferred back. And I thought to myself, well, it can be the same thing when I want it, you know, when I'm preparing myself for a game. It's not something that I go and write down, but in my head, when I'm going to the game, before the game, those are things that are sort of ticking over in my mind.
So it's amazing, really, because it's such an obvious transferable thing, sport and business.
Yeah,
you know, from both. So it's you know, you set up this business, it's going smoothly. The rugby's still obviously going from strength to strength. Then, like everyone, probably the biggest leveler ever in the world, you know, in our generation, and COVID comes around. So you have to deal with COVID from a rugby point of view, which has its own issues, its own difficulties. But then on top of that, you also have to deal with it simultaneously from a business point of view. And yours is obviously a business where, you know, you can't give someone a physio treatment over Zoom. So, you know, it's so from a rugby point of view, firstly, how was your kind of lockdown? How did you keep yourself busy? And was there anything within that situation that, not that you necessarily learned, but you reflected on? And then afterwards, from a business point of view, this is the same questions, but obviously for Carter and George.
Yeah. So rugby wise, Lockdown was tough, and I'm sure like generally everyone did that. The ebbs and flows of lockdown, really high, really low. But in terms of my, what again, make the most of the situation you're in. So start of lockdown, managed to fit a few weights and a watt bike in my garage, and thought to myself, right, well, this is a good opportunity.
Let's not downplay that. You essentially got a whole gym built in your garage. It's not just a few dumbbells.
Yeah, there's weights in there. So yeah, I mean, I actually found it really interesting, and I really enjoyed the challenge of it, because for the first time in my life, I was an individual athlete. We walk into the gym every day. We go into a rugby session every day, and we get told what to do. Our programs are in a pigeonhole. We write down. We've got an S&C coach. Do this, do that. Am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? And for the first time, I was like, well, actually, of course we had access. All the S&C staff were checking in with us, and if I had any questions, I could check. But actually, I could go, right, here's my week. I know what I need to get out of it, and I can do it on my terms as and when I want to do it, and sort of mold my week around my training. And I really loved it because it challenged me. Don't get me wrong, like I said, with this, my motivation, some days I'd wake up and be like, boom, here we go, hour watt bike, do my leg weights, bang. And there were some mornings where I wake up and just be like, what's the point? I don't know when I'm next playing rugby. And I really enjoyed that side of it, but I'd find a way to get it done anyway. And so, yeah, like I said, I loved it, because it put me in a position for the first time in my life where I had to sort my own stuff out and find out what worked for me best. And that has certainly transferred across coming back into the team environment, because, we've been in an environment now. I've played for Saracens for however long, and it's pretty much always been the same in terms of what lifts I do, what weights I do, what I do in a week. And actually I found a way of I basically realized that no one's going to know what works for me best other than me, if that makes sense, and from a selfish point of view. And so I was able to then have conversations with the S&C staff at Saracens, who are very accommodating and very educated, and just said to them, look, I was doing this in lockdown. I thought it worked really well for me. Do you think it would work in a rugby schedule? Yeah, no problem. That works really well. That doesn't. I haven't thought about that. And now my week is looked at very differently. And nutritionally, that's certainly the case. And with my weights and recovery, that's certainly the case also. So, I learned a huge amount in that period, and that side of it was great.
And it's one of the big themes in this conversation. There's a few. One of the big ones, and you said it possibly 3 or 4 times, is making the most of opportunity. And it's ironic that in one of the, as I say, one of the biggest, kind of crisis, this global pandemic, you've actually, after 20 or 30 years of your life, you've now finally had the opportunity to figure out what works best for you.
Yeah.
Which is a weird, when you, on the face of it, it's when you think about it, it's funny that it's taken such an extreme situation for that to come out. But actually it goes back to what you're saying in terms of, you've got to look at a situation and make the best out of it, however you may do that. And for you, say, and then taking it forward. So what about from a business point of view then? So was there anything, could you make the best of it from a business point of view, or was it a case of survive, get through?
It was a bit of both. We certainly went from it at the angle of like, right, how can we make the most out of this? And I think we did it to a certain extent. I'll get onto that. But I think initially for us, it was important to get our house in order. We had to furlough people, which is obviously really challenging, but made much easier by having good, honest conversations with people we knew, and who trusted us as people to give them as much information as we could. And don't get me wrong, it was really challenging, but I think the big thing for us was to go, right, okay, what can we do? Obviously, like you said, you can't do hands-on treatment. Everything's closed. We ran Zoom classes, 4 times a week in terms of with our S&C. So, a couple of days would be circuits classes. We'd run HIIT classes. We'd run sort of different flexibility sessions. What you name it, we tried it on Zoom, and they actually were really great. we had a great buy-in. There were a few times where I would jump in once a week and there'd be 30 people on the call, and that was absolutely amazing.
That's because you jumped on there, 30 people on the call, is it?
No, that was no. No, trust me, no one wants to watch me work out in my front room. It's not a good sight at the best of times. So yeah, we kept the business ticking over, and look, we were certainly challenged, and but at the same time, basically lockdown enabled me to be able to put my Carter and George hat on more than my rugby hat for the first time in its existence. So I was constantly having conversations with Reece, going, right, okay, how can we look at this? And we basically looked at our books and looked at it and said, right, well, we're actually not in a great place, but we're doing okay, given that we've had a great couple of years, and it's gone above and beyond what we ever thought it could do. So a lot of places must be struggling. So we sort of looked at it and went, well, actually, this is a great opportunity for us to further the business. We've got time on our hands for the first time where we're both available, and go, right, can we put a plan in place to open clinic number 2/3, however you look at it. And that was where Reece and I put our heads together and started going, okay, well, let's look at different areas. We knew we wanted it to be in Hertfordshire still. So, we started Google mapping places and looking at demographically what would work best for us, and then what model would we want to run. And we were really lucky that, so basically we've acquired a physio clinic in Radlett, Radlett Physiotherapy it was called, from a great woman there called Julie, who's been running the business for years, who's going to continue to then work for us when we open up our clinic. And yeah, we just basically want to take her model and put our spin on it. And that's us making the most of the opportunity, really, I guess. Don't get us wrong, we needed to keep ticking over the first clinic, but can we put our minds together and get potentially clinic number 2 on the go? And yeah, it's opening 1st of October, so really exciting times.
And it is, it's amazing to be in that situation. And as you say, it's not just the business you're dealing with, it's on the back of your mind thinking, well, I've got to keep fit. I've got to make sure when we do get back, whenever that is, we're in good nick. And obviously we're in the thick of the remaining part of the season. So to wrap up then, the things I've been hearing when you're talking, you spoke to start around this real stoic, controlling what you're controlling, goal setting has been massive, this real positive way of thinking of actually this acceptance of whatever the situation is, that's what it is. What can I now do to make the best of it? And take your story out of those kind of 4 principles are all directly transferable into anyone's life, context, industry, whatever it might be. But to wrap up, what would be your golden nugget? If you were going to go in and talk to a business, a person coming out the back of everything that's gone on with COVID, what would be your golden nugget that you would go, right, this is what you need to be thinking about?
It's so hard to put sort of one thing on it. I guess, I think throughout my sort of career, and another thing that lockdown's enabled me to do is being able to reflect. And it's something that as ambitious people, and sportsmen in particular, are always very bad at doing, because you're always you go on a Lions tour, immediately you're thinking about the start of next season, and probably until you retire you aren't able to do it. And I think that through my career I've learned to genuinely be honest with myself, and you can't ever cheat the system. Hard work is ultimately the best way of getting to where you want to be. And often at the start of my career, when everything was smooth sailing and I was sort of plateauing without realizing it, I wasn't reflecting and I wasn't honest with myself. I knew deep down that I wasn't doing everything that I needed to do. And if we are honest with ourselves, there are days where you go through the motions and you just get by. But actually be honest with yourself and dig deep. Like, that's the way that I look at things. You can't get anywhere without hard work, like I said. And you can lie to yourself and say, I am working hard, but ultimately, do you know what working hard is. And if you do, then you've cracked it. And be honest with yourself and make sure that you're working hard every day.
Amazing. And that bombshell, we'll wrap up. Jamie, it's been brilliant chatting to you. Thank you very much for giving us the time.
No problem.
And good luck with it all going forward.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Cheers, buddy.